I brought her to Guernsey, because I now live in Guernsey in the Channel Islands, and I brought her to Guernsey after Dad had died. We kept her at Amesbury, as many of you know, for as long as we could. And then there came a point, and Jill knows this well, that we just couldn't keep her there. The carer that she had was fantastic. We would have had to have interviewed another one. I interviewed about 80 to get Carol, and that was all a bit traumatic. So I decided to bring her to Guernsey. I told her she was going on holiday, because by that point her Alzheimer's had become quite bad. So I told her she was going on holiday. She was coming on the plane. A friend of mine was a nurse and offered to bring her, or help me to bring her, because I thought she might resist. Hi, come in. Come in, come in. Just park yourselves wherever you like. Nice to see you, there's another lady coming in. Hello. Don't worry, just perch wherever. There's plenty of space. She was in a home in Guernsey, and for the first few years, so I brought her over in 2009, the end of 2009, and she came into the home there, and to start with, we used to have lots of fun and laughter, and her humour, that some of you will have thought was fairly hidden on occasion, came to the fore. She had an incredible sense of humour, and there were a couple of times that I'd just like to tell you about that were very funny. One day I arrived at the home and she was zooming up the corridor with her Zimmer frame and all out of breath. And I said, "Mother, what are you doing? Have you been running the marathon?" And she said, "Don't be ridiculous, I've been skipping." That's me told. And then there was another occasion where my younger son, Sam, was with me in the home, and we were sitting in the window, just chatting, and she nudged me and said, "Who's that?" And Sam piped up and he said, "I'm your grandson, Granny," to give a bit of a clue. So he said, "Oh, I thought you'd come to mend my telly." So he said, "I'll mend your telly if you like." "Well, the telly's not broken." So a few minutes later, she nudged me again and said, "Who's that?" And Sam piped up and said, "I've come to mend your telly." And of course, we fell about laughing. And then she looked at us and said, "Why are you laughing?" And I said, "You've no idea how funny you are." Bless her. The one thing I'm incredibly proud of, and I think it will resonate with many of you here, Alzheimer's is a very cool thing and can turn people into quite unpleasant older people sometimes. And Mother never had that. She never shouted at anybody. She always said thank you to the last moment when she couldn't talk anymore. And she always appreciated everything everybody did. And she just said, "Thank you very much. Thank you for doing that." There was never a cross word. She never shouted at anybody. I know she shouted at you lot. She didn't shout at her carers ever. And that was one of the things that they said to me in the home, that she was a pleasure to have to care for. And I think Pippa and I both would take great heart in that. And as many of you know, she cared for an awful lot of people who perhaps weren't they were at the back of the room rather than the front of the room. She always went for the underdog, and I think that's really important. I'm just going to read this, which is a piece sent to me by Robert Harvey. Don't know any of you in the room here remember Robert Harvey? He was Dagenworth, so he was right. But he very much wanted it read. So, it's rather amazing to reflect. It's now 60 years since I arrived at Dagenworth. That was the school that they were in prior to Amesbury. At the end of September 1958, Pippa was a little girl and Sarah was merely en route. I continued to wonder what Jill's impressions were of me when she first saw me, a dysfunctional 8-year-old whose mother had died only a few months previously. I was so fortunate that she believed in a wholly practical style about how young boys should be educated. Touch freely was not for Jill. Rather encouragement, self-belief, and that anything was possible. She had her own ideas, not easily persuaded to change them. Sounds like me. She was slow in demonstrating her disapproval of some misdeed, but equally very supportive if one had met her very high standards. My 4 years at Daglingworth were transformative. The help, support, encouragement and discipline instilled in me by both Jill and Hugh made a huge difference to my life. Jill had strongly held beliefs and standards. Those did not always chime with others, but there were few who did not respect her. Circumstances frequently confirmed that she was on the right track. Over the succeeding 4 decades, I kept in touch and enjoyed our conversations. She was always interested in the progress of our children, frequently reminding me of when and how I went astray and suggesting ways about how my children could avoid similar pitfalls. Jill was one of the most remarkable people in my life. I owe her so much, as I believe do so many others who embraced her tutelage. We mourn her passing, but celebrate and give thanks to her for how much she gave and contributed to the lives of others. And that was Robert Harvey, who was at Daglingworth from 58 to 62. Is there anybody in the room who remembers a boy called Abbas Karuni? Jill does. And there's one of the ladies at the back, I think, does. Yeah, I think so. So are there any boys here that remember him? No.
I recognise the name.
Okay. He was a child from Iran. He was a refugee from Iran. I got a piece, he's written a book, and I was hoping there might be a couple of people that were here at the same time. But this guy is now a successful lawyer in California, an actor, and he's written 2 books. And at the you might be interested, the first one's called On 2 Feet and Wings. And the very last chapters how he fled from Iran. He spent 4 months on the streets of Istanbul at the age of 9, and then he arrived at Amesbury as a child speaking no English, into the hands of mum and dad. So he had a carer called Mahi, I can't remember his name now, that lived in Worcester. Mehdi, that's it. Who said that? You remembered it, Mehdi, there you are, so I was telling you. But Mehdi actually was designated carer, and in the holidays he went to the Abbey International School, which is where Jane and I went to school, and worked as a slave in the kitchen. Literally as a slave. Not when we were there, no. This is later. And Mehdi beat him up. And Mum found out about him being beaten up and cared for him. This is what I was saying about her caring for the underdog and the person that she always cared for those people that were. So you probably remember the story quite well.
I remember how incredibly well balanced he was.
Yeah.
Knowing his history. It was
Yes.
incredible that he could be like that.
Yeah, and this man broke 3 of his ribs, and he came back to school with his ribs broken. And then she said one day, "Come here, I need to see you," and lifted his shirt up. And then, I believe, you took him to the hospital, right, Norma?
I think I did.
You did. It's in the book. I'll show you later. It's in the book. You took him to the hospital, and then obviously he came back to school, and Mum, they obviously, I'm sure, you know. But it's so interesting. I just want to read you this little bit. And this is about the boy who arrives at the school, knowing not anything about where the hell he's going. Right, let's get the first bit. So he's coming from Worcester, so his care is in Worcester. We were driving along narrow roads bordered on each side by tall hedges. Beyond them were the acres upon acres of farmland spread up and down the hills of the Worcestershire countryside. Suddenly Mehdi squeaked to a halt, reversed and drove up a gravel driveway through a wooded forest. It was absolutely stunning. There were a few cottages along the way, and I could even make out a large lake through the trees to my left. After about half a mile, the driveway cut through a clearing of perfectly mown grass, revealing an 18th century red brick mansion with green ivy climbing up the walls. I could see large hills in the distance, with cows grazing in little herds. It was divine. The massive double oak doors had engravings etched on them, and there was a large decorated bell one had to pull. It was obvious that the doors were the originals from when the house was built hundreds of years ago. Mehdi rang the bell and we waited. An elderly lady, wearing dignified old-fashioned clothes, opened the door. She looked at me through her glasses and smiled. "You must be Abbas," she said in her perfect English accent. Sorry it's not replicated here. "Welcome to Amesbury School, your new home." "Hello, madam," I said quietly, offering my hand. "My name is Mrs. Griffith," she said. "I'm the headmistress." Meddy said something very quickly to Mrs. Griffith and almost reluctantly shook her hand. She nodded and Meddy turned to me. "I'm late, I have to go," he said. "Behave yourself and be good." With that, he got into the car and drove away. Mrs. Griffith put her hand on my head, picked up the larger suitcase with her other hand, and guided me through the imposing doors. "Come on, young man, we have important work to do." "Yes, madam." She stopped and took a long look at me. After a few seconds, she smiled. "What are we going to do with these large clothes, Abbas? I'm sure we can come up with something better." The floor was entirely made of oak boards. The smell of fresh polish Mrs. T. The smell of fresh polish rose off every square inch. Mrs. Griffith led me up the grandest staircase I'd ever seen. The steps were at least 10 feet wide with broad, polished banisters on either side. A green carpet ran up the stairs and muffled, squeaky floorboards underneath. As I walked upwards, I could feel the butterflies in my stomach. When Mrs. Griffith reached the top step, a group of 5 or 6 boys who'd been running by stopped and began to walk. They were all neatly dressed in the school uniform. Mrs. Griffith summoned a boy. He had blonde hair, blue eyes and a constant smile. He was everything I'd imagined an English schoolboy to be when I was in Iran. "Murphy," said Mrs. Griffith, "this is Abbas. You will be his uncle." And you all remember that. So a little bit further on in the book, Mr. Griffith was a tall man in his mid-60s, dressed in a tweed suit that probably had been very expensive in the 60s. He had deep blue eyes and silver hair, and in his mouth was a pipe. He carried the odour of tobacco with him. He looked at every child one by one. "Apart from those instructed differently, be seated." Everyone except for Smith and Haynes sat down. Mr. Griffith walked slowly towards me with his clunky brown shoes. My heart was racing. He reached over my head to open the window immediately above me and tapped his pipe on the edge of the sill. His booming baritone echoed round the room. "Smith?" "Yes, sir?" Smith's squeaky voice replied. "Why are you standing?" "For disobedience, sir." Mr. Griffith twisted 180 degrees on one heel to stare at Smith. Haynes bowed his head in anticipation of the interrogation. "Go on," Mr. Griffith said to Smith as he walked back to the far end of the room. "Well, sir," Alan asked the school to be quiet, well, making a nuisance of yourselves." "Yes, sir," Smith muttered. "Let me guess. Mr. Haynes, was that something to do with you, perchance?" "Yes, sir," Haynes said, looking at the floor. "You can look at a man when you speak to him, Haynes." Haynes instantly raised his head and looked nervously at Mr. Griffith. "You are both pests," Mr. Griffith said, stuffing fresh tobacco in his pipe and searching for his matches. "What are you?" "Pests, sir," Smith and Haynes parroted together. "Now sit down and learn to be human beings." Mr. Griffith lit his match and puffed on his pipe. He then turned to me. "We have a new student amidst us," he said, looking at me. "His name is Abbas Kazarouni, but we shall call him Abbas. Let us welcome him and help him to settle in the way you all did when you started." So that just gives you a little flavour. So now I'm going to pass over to Pippa, who'll do all the historical bit that I'm rubbish at. So she's good at that stuff.